What's up everybody, it's Blue here at Blue Bears Games, and for the second week in a row, I am taking a break from the Commander Precon unboxing and upgrade videos. I've decided instead to show you the newest addition to my budget Commander builds that I sell on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page, which uses Gisa and Geralf as the Commander. There's actually a short story about this deck that I need to tell you, which I'll get into in just a moment, but let's get the support my channel shtick out of the way first. That if you'd like to help support my channel, you can do so in the following ways. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, share any of my content on your socials so other people can discover it, and or watch some of my many other videos yourself. In addition to that, if you're interested in ways that you can help support my channel monetarily, please read the description of this video, and there you will find a myriad of options for what you can do to help me keep this channel going. Anything that you can do to help is greatly appreciated, and I thank you for it. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. So, the story is that I've actually had everything except the lands for this deck ready to go since early September of 2022 because I was trying to get this ready for the Halloween season of that year. The reason why it's taken me this long to finally finish the deck, make this video, and put it up for sale is because as I was putting it together, Wizards announced the starter commander decks, and unfortunately for me, a deck very similar to this one was one of the decks announced called Grave Danger. Because of this announcement, I decided to put finishing this deck on hold until I could figure out what I wanted to do with it. The reason why I've decided to go ahead and add the lands, make this video, and put it up on the Facebook page now though, is twofold. The first reason is because I believe that enough time has passed and availability of their deck is low enough that there should be enough room on the market for both to exist. The other reason is because I feel that I already put the work in and I hate the thought of wasting all that time, so why the hell not, right? Obviously, if Wizards made a similar deck, then they thought it was worth putting it out there, so the work I put into this build deserved to see the light of day as well. So here we are. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about this deck, particularly Gisa and Geralf real quick, and then I'll show you what I came up with for my version of this build. Gisa and Geralf is 1 black, 1 blue, and 2 generic mana to cast for a 4/4 legendary human wizard with the following 2 abilities. The first ability says that when they enter, mill 4 cards. This seems like a negative thing at first, until you read the other ability, which says that once during each of your turns, you may cast a zombie creature spell from your graveyard. Basically, they fill your graveyard with zombies that you can cast later thanks to their second ability. Obviously there will be a lot of zombies in this build, but what else did I add? Why don't I just show you? So as I normally like to do, I'll start with the lands. This is your normal budget selection here. We start with Exotic Orchard. I normally do not like Exotic Orchard in most decks, but when it comes to the color combination of black and blue, also known as Dimir, I kind of like it because it's 2 of the most popular colors. So this actually gets some use in this deck. Next is Path of Ancestry. It enters the battlefield tapped, but it does add a mana of any color that is part of your commander's color identity, so that helps. The only problem is that while this does allow you to scry 1, the commander in this deck is a human wizard instead of a zombie, so that might not come into play as much as other tribal/kin decks that are out there. It's just there for mana fixing. And then, of course, we've got the normal budget dual lands, so things like the Mirror Guildgate, Dismal Backwater, helps you gain life at least, Submerged Boneyard, Thriving Moor, Thriving Isle. And then we turn into some utility lands, so things like Encroaching Waste, because I've said this many times in my budget commander videos. You need something that gets rid of a problematic land. Most decks have at least 1 devastating land in it, especially if they're like more competitive. So I like to add that to every single budget deck I make. Craterlia Cursed was just a fun one. It comes into play untapped, which is nice. It only taps to add a colorless, but you can sack it later to create a 2/2 zombie token, and this deck will revolve a lot around tokens, so it was just a nice little bonus. Then we got Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse. They are basically for deck thinning and mana fixing, because there are going to be a lot more black mana sources in this deck than blue, so you can go get them if you need them. And then, of course, as we were talking about, the black swamps sources, and then islands. And again, there are more swamps than islands because this deck is much heavier in the black. Moving on to the ramp section of this build, So black and blue don't have spells that really go and get lands and either put them into play or your hand for you, so we had to rely on mana rocks that do that. So we go with something like Traveler's Amulet because it does deck thin and it does mana fix. Same thing with the Renegade map, and they're cheap to cast. They're all one to cast. Environmental Sciences, it goes and searches again for a land, puts it in your hand, and then you also gain 2 life, which is always a nice bonus. Ecologist Terrarium does it too. It's 2 to cast, and then when it comes into play, you search your library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it in your hand, and then later you can pay 2 and tap and sack it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, but only as a sorcery. Mind Stone, it's good 2 to cast, mana rock, doesn't come into play tapped, and then you can sack it later if you don't need the extra mana to draw a card. And then we've got the diamonds. So Sky Diamond, because it's 2 to cast, and Charcoal Diamond. Next, we go to the Heart and Soul of this deck, which is a very big section, which is the creature section. Every card here is a zombie that does something that this deck wants to do. So let's go over it. We start with Foulmire Knight. It is a 1 to cast 1/1 with Death Touch, but it also has an adventure attached to it that allows you to draw a card at the cost of a life. That will be important later. When you go to recur it with Gisa and Geralf, you really can't do the adventure part, so it's a repeatable 1/1 Death Toucher if you need it, if it's your only option available. Next is Zombie Cannibal. It is another 1 to cast 1/1 zombie that when it deals damage to a player, combat damage specifically, you can exile a card from the graveyard, so it's good control factor. Grim Physician, another 1-drop 1/1 that when it dies, it gives target creature that you want that an opponent controls -1/-1 until end of turn. So it gets rid of those little pesky 1/1s that people don't attack with that are like utility stuff. And remember, you can get it back with your commander here. Hunted Ghoul is just an efficient 1 to cast 1/2. It can't block humans, but I mean, does it really matter? Eternal Taskmaster is a 2 to cast 2/3, so it's efficiently costed. It comes into play tapped, but whenever it attacks, you can pay 3, and if you do, you return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and that plays nicely with things like Foulmire Knight, because then you can do the adventure if you want. Siege Zombie is a 2 to cast 2/2 that you can just tap 3 untapped creatures you control to have each opponent lose a life. There's a lot of token creation here and a lot of zombie actual cards in here, so at the end of the opponent before you who goes, at the end of their turn, you can just start tapping your creatures if they're untapped and start draining people of their life totals. Rancid Rats is a 2 to cast 1/1 with Death Touch and Skulk. So it has a little bit of evasion, and as a defender, it can kill anything on the board that's not flying because it has Death Touch. Lazotep Reaper is a 2 to cast 1/2 that starts the token creation of the creatures. It has Amass 1 when it enters, and that is part of the theme of this deck is token creation, so this is the first part. There will be a lot more to come. Ghastly Gloom Hunter is actually to fill a hole that this deck will have. A weakness for zombies is the fact that there are not a lot of flying zombies out there. I mean, let's just be honest. Do zombies fly? No. This one happens to. At early game, it's a 1/1 with flying and lifelink, and later game, it's a 3/3 with flying and lifelink. So it gains you life. It helps with flying creatures. It's just overall a good card to have for a zombie deck. Fleshbag Marauder is a 3 to cast 3/1 that when it enters the battlefield, each player must sacrifice a creature, and of course you're going to choose this because it's a self-sacrifice that you can cast again later with your commander in this deck. It's repeatable if you do it over and over every turn. Lord of the Accursed is the first of many zombie lords in this deck. It is a efficiently costed 3 to cast 2/3 that gives all other zombies you control a buff of +1/+1, and then evasion with its tap ability to give them menace. Liliana's Devotee is another efficiently costed one. It is 3 to cast for a 2/3 that gives zombies you control +1/+0, so half the buff. And then at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 2 to create a 2/2 zombie creature token. Spark Reaper is a 3 to cast 2/3 that is a sack outlet that lets you draw a card and gain life. Silver Smoke Ghoul is a 3 to cast 3/1 that has a self graveyard recursion ability and an ability that you can sacrifice it to draw a card. So you can cast it later again if you need to, or it can return itself because of the first ability. Caged Zombie is another 3 to cast 2/3 that has an ability for 2 and tapping it. You can have each opponent lose 2 life, so more whittling of their health totals, but you can only activate it if a creature died this turn. Fell Stinger is a 3 cast 3/2 with Death Touch and an exploit ability. And when you exploit a creature, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. So it helps you draw cards. So you can kill something like a stupid token on your side when you exploit, and you can draw 2 cards and you'll have to lose 2 life, but there's some life gain in this deck, so that's not really that big a deal. Vizier of the Scorpion is a 3 cast 1/1 that when it enters, you amass 1, so you create a token. If you already had an army token in play, you give it a +1/+1 counter. Then it gives all zombie tokens you control Death Touch. So this is kind of a zombie token lord, if you will. One of a couple. Archghoul of Thraben is a 3 cast 3/2 that whenever it or another zombie you control dies, you look at the top card of your library, and if it's a zombie, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. And if you don't put it into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. So it kind of scries a little for you. It's not bad. It actually can put a lot of cards in your hand. There's a lot of zombies in this deck, so there are a lot of chances for it to flip over a zombie. Next is Aven Eternal. It is a 3 cast 2/2 flying zombie, so another hole filler here, that also happens to amass 1 when it enters. Liliana's Standard Bearer is a 3 cast 3/1 with Flash, so it can be cast anytime you can cast an instant. And then whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures that died under your control this turn. A lot of sacrifice outlets in this deck, so the fact that you can do it on somebody else's turn means that you can use other abilities, like the one that sacrifices a creature to let you draw a card and gain a life, so you can draw more cards. Cemetery Reaper is another lord. It is a 30 cast 2/2 that gives all other zombies you control a buff of +1/+1, and then a pretty cool ability that allows you to pay 3 and tap it to exile target creature card from a graveyard, not just yours, but any, so that's your opponent's included, to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Ghoul Raiser starts. The next 3 have the same ability, and they can be looped. So Ghoul Raiser, when it enters, you can take a zombie card from your graveyard and put it into your hand. Gravedigger, when it enters, you can put any creature card from your graveyard into your hand. And then Grave Shifter, same thing, only now, instead of it being a zombie, it is every creature type all the time, because it has Changeling. So they can be looped if you have enough mana to keep sacrificing one if you have a sack outlet, to go and get another one from your graveyard, put in your hand, play it, and grab the one that you just sacrificed. It's a nice little loop that you can do. I don't have anything in this at the moment that can take advantage of that, but if you do take this deck, you may want to do that. Next is Draugr Recruiter. It's very similar to the last 3 cards, only now you have to attack with it to get its boost ability. So it's 4 to cast for a 3/3, but when you attack with it, you can pay 4 to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Abatar Ghoul is a 4 to cast 3/2 first striker that whenever it deals combat damage to any creature and that creature dies, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So a little bit more life gain. Accursed Horde is a 4 to cast 3/3 that you can pay 2 and give target attacking zombie you control indestructible until end of turn, which works great with the ghoul I just showed you. Vengeful Ghoul, this is a good one. It is a 4 to cast 3/2 that whenever it or another zombie, not just your zombies, but anybody's zombies, is put into a graveyard from play or dies, each opponent will lose a life, so more whittling down of your opponent's health totals. Eternal Skylord is a high cast of 5 for a 3/3, but what it does is not bad. So it amasses 2 when it enters, so it either creates a token for you and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, or if you already have an army token in play, it puts 2 +1/+1 counters on it. But it also gives all zombie tokens you control flying, which fills a major hole, again, that this deck has of not having flying. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, or Gary, is just a good zombie. It's a 5 to cast 2/4 that when it enters play, you count your devotion, which includes itself, by the way, because it'll be in play, and then each opponent will lose life equal to your devotion, and you will gain that much life. It's just a game ender if it's late game. It's a really nice card. Blade Stitch Scab is an efficiently costed 2 to cast 2/3 that gives all our zombies you control +1/+0, so it is a half lord. Diregraph Captain, another good lord. It is a 3 to cast 2/2 with Death Touch, gives all other zombie creatures you control +1/+1, and then whenever another zombie you control dies, target opponent loses a life. So it whittles down life totals, it buffs all of your guys, and it even has Death Touch in case you need to block with it. Gleaming Overseer, this is the best version of a Amass and a Quasi-Lord of the bunch. It's a 3 to cast 1/4 that when it enters you amass 1, but then it also gives all zombie tokens you control hexproof and menace. So it gives them all protection and evasion. Probably the best quasi-lord for zombie tokens of the bunch. Prize to Malcolm is a 3 to cast 3/3 with a really interesting self-graveyard recursion ability. You can read it if you want. Basically, it just says if you've played something from your graveyard, or something entered play for you from your graveyard, it also returns itself at the end of the turn. Narfi, Betrayer King, is a 5 to cast 4/3 that is a lord for zombies and snow creatures, so it gives them a buff of +1/+1. And then it has a cool ability that can self-return. However, it requires snow mana sources, and there are no snow mana sources in this deck because monetarily they didn't make sense for a budget deck. So if you want, you can add them yourself if you decide to purchase this deck, and then you will be able to return Narfi from your graveyard to play for 3 snow mana. Death Priest of Miracle. It's another Lord. If you haven't noticed, I think this is Lord number 8 or 9. There's a bunch of them. 4 to cast for a 2/2 that gives skeletons, vampires, and zombies you control +1/+1. It doesn't say other because it's not either one of those types itself. And then, even better, is that at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 1 generic mana, and if you do, you create a 1/1 black skeleton creature token. So it's not a zombie creator, but it is a token creator that, can be sacrificed later, but it also gets the buff from Death Priest Merkle itself. Herald of the Dread Horde. This is the last creature that I'll show you. It is basically just a generic 4 to cast 3/2 that also amasses when it enters play. It amasses 2, so you put 2 +1/+1 counters on an army you control, or you create an army token that's a 0/0, and then put the 2 counters on it. Next up is the instants and sorceries that I've put in this deck. There are 3 sections. We've got Counter Magic, which is basically like removal. Then we have card draw, and then we have other. So we'll start off with the Counter Magic. I have a selection of budget Counter Magic I like to choose for my budget decks. It includes things like Annul, because it's 1 to cast, and it counters an artifact or an enchantment, which is very useful. Disdainful Stroke, 2 to cast, and it counters any spell that's converted mana cost or mana value now of 4 or greater, which is a lot of stuff in Commander. Negate counters any non-creature spell. No Escape counters a creature or a planeswalker spell, and if that spell is countered this way, you exile instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard, and you get to scry 1. Deny the Divine, another 3 to cast. It counters target creature or enchantment spell, and if that spell was countered, you exile instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. And then the last one is you find the Villain's Lair. This one is a 3 to cast, where you get to choose either to counter target spell or draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. 2 things here. Number 1, discarding cards in this deck isn't all that bad because if you discard zombies, you can cast them again with Gisa and Geralf. But it also parlays into my next section, which is the card draw. And I say card draw, but what I really mean is putting cards in your hand, because not everything here says specifically to draw cards. We start with Nagging Thoughts. It's 2 to cast, and it says that you may look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So it's not technically drawing cards, it's putting cards in your hand. And then it has Madness too, which isn't really all that relevant, but it could be because I did just show you find the Villain's Lair. You had to discard cards, you can pay the Madness cost of a card you discard, and you'll still get the effect. Perilous Research, it's 2 to cast, to draw 2 cards, and then you have to sacrifice a permanent, which is helpful because sometimes you just need to be able to sacrifice something to be able to get it back later. A Little Chat, 2 to cast, with a casualty of 1. So what that means is that when you cast this spell, you can sacrifice a creature with power 1 or greater as an additional cost, and then you copy this spell. And it allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. Curate, this actually all just means Surveil now. Surveil 2 is what this is turned into, and then you draw a card. Again, putting cards in your graveyard in this deck, not always a bad thing. Catalog, 3 to cast, draw 2 cards and discard a card. Pretty simple. Same thing with Divination. Very simple. 3 to cast, draw 2 cards. And the last card draw card is FOF, or Fact or Fiction. That's what we called it back in the day, was FOF. I'm not sure if that's what it still said. It's 4 to cast. For an instant that you reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those 5 cards into 2 piles, and you choose a pile to put in your hand and the rest into your graveyard, which, again, this is a graveyard recursion deck, so putting things in your graveyard, not all that bad. The third section is just utility stuff. I didn't put any black removal in here, but I did put a blue removal in here called Raven Form. I chose this one because it exiles an artifact or creature, and it's the only artifact removal, really technically, like actual removal, in both colors. I mean, there's other things that can do it, but they're expensive monetarily, or they have caveats. This just exiles an artifact or a creature. However, its controller creates a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, which isn't all that devastating. It also foretells for 1 blue, so you can actually exile it from your hand and then cast it on a later turn for when you need it. So it's not clogging up your hand. Reap the Seagraph was just a fun card I threw in here. I've been wanting to put this in a deck for a while. It's a 3 to cast sorcery that just simply creates a 2/2 black creature token for you. Black zombie creature token for you. And then it flashes back, so you can do it again. The last card for this section is called Final Parting. This is one of my favorite tutors in the game because it tutors for 2 cards. So it's 5 to cast, which is expensive, but what it does is actually combines 2 cards into one. It combines a Demonic Tutor and a card that goes and gets a card and puts it in your graveyard, because that's what this card does. You go ahead and search for 2 cards, you put one in your hand and one in your graveyard, and again, I've told you a couple times now, putting a card into your graveyard in this deck is not the death knell for it, since we are graveyard recursion. Up next is the enchantments. There are only 3, but what 3 there are really good. We start with Ghoul Procession. It's a 2 to cast enchantment that says whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die. It does not say that you control, so this means any creature. You create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, and it only can trigger once a turn. So again, it doesn't matter who owns the creature. If it dies, you create a 2/2 Decayed zombie. The caveat of it only happening once a turn, you have to realize that also means a turn, not just yours. So it could happen on your opponent's turns too, so the bigger the pod, the more opportunities to get a 2/2 Decayed zombie is. Next is Liliana's Mastery. It's 5 to cast enchantment that is it's not a lord because it's not a creature. This is an anthem effect that gives all zombies you control +1/+1. And then it even creates 2/2 zombies for you when it enters. It basically does everything this deck wants to do. Last enchantment, really good one. Secrets of the Dead. 3 to cast. Says whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, draw a card. Realize that there is a infinite combo potential with this and a certain 1-drop zombie and a certain 3-drop sack outlet that's an artifact. If you want to know more about what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments, but there is combo potential here. I just monetarily can't put in here because those pieces alone cost more than the deck costs. And finally, the last card is just protection for your commander or any creature that you want to protect. It's Mirror Shield. It's the budget version of like Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots that I put in every budget commander deck that I have. It's 2 to cast and equips for 2, and it gives the equipped creature a bigger butt of +0/+2, hexproof, which is important, and then this thing with Death Touch that, you know, if it blocks or becomes blocked by anything with Death Touch, that creature also dies. Again, this is my budget way of putting in like Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots to protect any creature that you need to protect on the board. And there you have it, folks, the newest addition to my budget commander decks that uses Gisa and Geralf as the commander. By the time you watch this video, it will already be added to the list of decks available for sale on the Blue Bears Games Facebook page and on the Facebook Marketplace. If you were to compare this deck to the Grave Danger deck that Wizards made with the same theme, there are a lot of similarities. However, there are also some very big differences. My version focuses more on both token creation and using lords to buff your zombies, but I'm not entirely sure what the Grave Danger precon is more focused on because it seems rather scattered. I've looked at the Grave Danger list and even have an unopened precon that I will unbox at a later date, but I just think that it looks like a bunch of zombies mashed together for the sake of having a zombie deck to sell. If you're so inclined, you can do the comparison yourself and let me know what you think, but again, I'll eventually be unboxing it myself, and at that time, I'll do a more in-depth comparison. I'm probably a little biased, but I do think my version is better. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching, and if you're looking for more Magic content to watch, please browse my playlists, as I'm sure you'll find more of my videos that you'll enjoy. Before you go, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you can be notified when I release new content. Have a nice day, and I hope to see you again real soon.